There's a photo hanging in my parents' living room. It's the first thing you see when you walk through the front door, a massive canvas print, professionally framed, centered perfectly above the fireplace. It shows my entire family. My parents standing in the middle, looking proud. My older brother and his wife. My younger sister and her fiancé. My aunt and uncle from Ohio. My cousins. My grandmother, seated in a velvet chair like she's royalty. 94 people, total. I know the exact number because I counted every face in that photo the first time I saw it. I counted twice, actually. Standing in my parents' entryway, still in my coat, still holding the birthday cake I had driven 3 hours to bring my mother. I stood there and counted 94 faces. Mine was not one of them. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I'm not someone who catastrophizes. I'm not someone who reads into things. I spent most of my life being the opposite of that, the one who made excuses for everyone, who filled in the gaps with generous interpretations, who told herself that absence doesn't mean what it looks like. I'm telling you this because I need you to know that what I'm about to describe is not me overreacting. This is not a story about a sensitive person who couldn't handle being accidentally left out of one photo. This is a story about 28 years of being the blank space in the frame. I'm the middle child. Not middle in a romantic, forgotten but resilient way. Middle in the most logistical, overlooked sense of the word. My older brother, Marcus, was the firstborn. Everything he did was a milestone. First steps, first words, first day of school, my parents documented all of it like historians. My younger sister Danielle came 5 years after me and arrived as the baby, the soft one, the one everyone fussed over. I came in between them and I stayed in between them. Not loud enough to be noticed. Not young enough to be babied. I remember being 7 years old and coming home from school to find my mother had redecorated my bedroom without telling me. She'd moved things around, changed the curtains, hung new artwork. When I asked why, she said she thought I'd like it. She didn't ask. She didn't notice that the one stuffed animal I actually cared about had been packed into a box and put in the garage. I went to bed that night in a room that felt like it belonged to someone else, and I told myself she was just busy. I told myself that a lot. By the time I was a teenager, I had developed a talent for making myself small. Not on purpose. It happened gradually, the way water shapes rock slowly, through repetition, over years. I learned not to bring up plans early because they tended to be scheduled over. I learned not to mention needs too loudly because they got acknowledged and then forgotten. I learned to double-check everything, invitations, holidays, family events, because if I didn't, I'd find out I was missing from the guest list after the fact. I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you my family was cruel in an obvious way. They weren't. My parents are not villains. They're people who simply had a limited amount of emotional bandwidth and had made, over the years, unspoken decisions about how to allocate it. Marcus got most of it because he was the oldest and the most like my father. Danielle got the rest because she was the youngest and the most like my mother. I got the version of parental love that exists in the absence of deliberate neglect, the kind where you're fed and clothed and helped with homework, but where your birthday is the one they have to check their phones to remember, where your accomplishments are responded to with, "That's great, honey," and then the conversation moves on. The photo above the fireplace was for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. They had been planning it for over a year. I knew about it. Vaguely. My mother had mentioned something about a big anniversary celebration, a professional photographer, the whole family coming together. I didn't receive any specific information, no date, no location, no invitation, but I assumed I would. I assumed I was on the list of people who would naturally receive details when the time came. The celebration happened on a Saturday in September. I found out it had occurred on Monday morning when my cousin posted a slideshow on Instagram with the caption, "The most beautiful family weekend. So much love." I scrolled through 17 photos before I fully understood what I was looking at. There was the venue, a gorgeous outdoor estate about an hour from my parents' house, string lights everywhere, long tables covered in white linen. There was my grandmother in the velvet chair. There were Marcus and his wife looking tan and relaxed. There was Danielle, glowing, holding her fiancé's hand. There were aunts and uncles and cousins and people I recognized from holiday cards. There was the professional photographer's setup, beautiful golden hour light, everyone arranged perfectly across the lawn for the big group shot. And there, in the corner of one photo, were the catered platters. 94 people had been fed on those platters. 94 people had toasted my parents 30 years together. 94 people knew about this event, made travel arrangements, showed up, smiled at cameras, and then went home with memories of a weekend I didn't know was happening. I set my phone down and I went to get a glass of water. Here's what I did not do. I did not call my mother crying. I did not text my sister demanding an explanation. I did not spiral into a rage and send a series of messages I'd regret. I stood at my kitchen counter and I drank my water and I thought, very calmly, about what it meant that 94 people had been considered, including the neighbor couple from their old street who they barely speak to anymore, and I had not. I thought about all the times I had explained this away. I thought about my college graduation, when my parents left early because my father had lower back pain, and I told myself that was valid. I thought about the year I didn't receive a birthday card, and when I mentioned it, my mother said she thought she'd already sent it, and I told myself people forget. I thought about the time I was hospitalized for 3 days for a bad infection, and my family sent a flower arrangement with a card signed by all of them. And I thought it was sweet until I realized the arrangement had been ordered through a generic gift delivery service, and the signature was automated. I thought about the family group chat that I was not in. I found out about it through Marcus, who texted me something that was clearly meant for the group chat, and then quickly sent a follow-up saying, "Wrong thread, sorry." I never mentioned it. I told myself, maybe it was just a subgroup for planning surprises. Standing at my counter with my glass of water, I understood for the first time that I had spent 28 years curating a collection of generous explanations for a family that had quietly, consistently, and without malice, decided that I was optional. I'm not going to tell you I handled the next few days with grace. I didn't reach out to my family at all, and I'd like to say that was a conscious, dignified choice. But the truth is, I simply had nothing to say. There's a particular kind of hurt that lives below anger, something quieter and more final, and that's what I was sitting with. Not rage. Something more like clarity. I had a journal I'd kept since I was in college. Not a diary, exactly more of a writing habit. I'd always process things by writing them out, so that's what I did. I started writing about the anniversary party, but then I kept going back further and further, and the document got longer and longer over the course of about 2 weeks. I wasn't thinking about an audience. I was thinking about myself, about finally laying out in plain language, in chronological order, everything I had spent nearly 3 decades minimizing and reframing and forgiving without being asked. I wrote about the bedroom curtains. I wrote about the graduation. I wrote about the group chat. I wrote about the anniversary party. I wrote about the photo above the fireplace that I'd seen on one of my previous visits, the one where I'd stood holding that birthday cake, counting 94 faces and finding none of mine. I wrote about what it feels like to be someone's child and to understand, not through any single dramatic event, but through the accumulation of 1,000 small omissions, that you are the one they could take or leave. At some point, without really deciding to, I turned the document into something I could post online. I didn't use my real name. I didn't use my family's real names. I changed enough details that it was technically a personal essay, not a public accusation. I posted it on a platform I'd had for years but rarely used, mostly because I wrote things there that I never intended anyone to actually read. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I went to sleep, woke up, went to work. 2 days later, I had a notification on my phone saying something I'd posted had gotten unusual engagement. I opened the app, and the essay had been shared over 4,000 times. By the end of that week, it had been picked up by 2 larger platforms with bigger audiences. Someone had quoted a section of it, the part about counting the faces in the photo, and that quote alone had been reshared thousands of times. People were writing responses. People were tagging their own stories. People were saying, in the comments, that they had sat in their own kitchens and drunk their own glasses of water and felt that exact same quiet thing I had described. I watched all of this from a distance. I hadn't told anyone in my personal life about the essay. I hadn't connected it to my real identity anywhere online. Then my cousin texted me. She said she'd seen an essay going around that sounded, and she was asking gently. She wanted to say that sounded a lot like it could be about our family. She wanted to know if I was okay. She wanted to know if it was me. I told her yes. I don't know who she told or how long it took to reach my mother, but it couldn't have been more than 48 hours. My mother called on a Thursday evening. I was making dinner. I let it ring twice before I answered, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to finish what I was doing first. I turned the stove down and I picked up the phone. She didn't say hello. She said, "What did you do?" I told her I wrote something. She said it wasn't just something. She said it was embarrassing. She said people, and here she lowered her voice the way she does when something is especially serious. People from the anniversary weekend had read it. Her friend had texted her about it. Her sister had texted her. The photographer had apparently seen it shared in a group she was part of. She said I had made her look like a terrible mother. I asked her if she had read it. She said that wasn't the point. I told her I thought it was exactly the point. She said we needed to talk about this as a family. She said there were two sides to everything. She said she didn't know where this was coming from. She said she was hurt. And here is the part I want to be careful about, because I know it's the part that will make some people angry. I didn't yell. I didn't list grievances. I didn't give her a chance to explain, and I didn't ask for one. Not because I'm cold, and not because I didn't have feelings about what she was saying. I had enormous feelings. But I had also spent 28 years having enormous feelings quietly and privately, and I was done doing that in a way that left the other person's comfort intact. I told her that I had written the truth. I told her that the truth had resonated with a lot of people who had experienced the same thing, and that I was glad it had. I told her I loved her, and I meant it, because I do. That's the complicated part no one warns you about. You can love someone and still name what they've done. Those two things don't cancel each other out. And then I told her I needed some time and I would reach out when I was ready. She was still talking when I hung up. My sister called an hour later. Then Marcus. Then my aunt, which surprised me most because I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. The phone rang, and I let it ring, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat with the strange feeling of being, for the first time, completely visible. Here's what I've thought about a lot since then. People keep asking me if I went too far. A few of the comments on the essay asked that. Some of the people who knew me personally asked it gently, in the way you ask something when you already think the answer is yes. And I understand the question. I understand that writing publicly about your family is a choice with consequences. And I'm not pretending otherwise. But here's my answer. The anniversary party had 94 guests. My parents chose each of those 94 people. They thought about seating arrangements and catering numbers and RSVPs and travel logistics for 94 people, and at no point in that entire process did my name come up as someone who should be included. That is also a choice with consequences. It just didn't have any, until I made some. I'm not living for their approval anymore. That's not a dramatic declaration, it's more like finishing a long project. I spent almost 3 decades working very hard to earn something that was never going to be given, and at some point, you have to set that work down. Not in anger, not in performance, just you set it down. The essay is still up. It's been read by more people than attended my parents' anniversary party, which is the kind of thing I can notice now without bitterness, just as information. I don't know what comes next with my family. My cousin, the one who texted first, has stayed in touch, and I'm grateful for that. The others have gone quiet in the way that sometimes means they're waiting and sometimes means they've decided. I'm not waiting for them to decide. I still have the journal I wrote in during those 2 weeks. I still write in it sometimes. Not about my family, mostly. About my own life, the one I've been building slowly and steadily while everyone was looking somewhere else. It turns out there's a lot of room in a life when you stop trying to fit into a frame that was never made for you. I found that out late, but I found it out, and for the first time in 28 years, I'm not filling in that space with an explanation. I'm just living in it.